But before we dive into the disturbing tales of the night, let me ask you, do you have the courage to stay until the end? Most viewers don't subscribe to the channel, perhaps out of oversight, or perhaps because after hearing these stories, they never slept the same way again. If you think you can handle it, click subscribe now.
My name is Eric. I'm 29 years old, and what I'm about to tell is not something that happened to me directly, but it's been told in my family for so long. It's as if it's etched in me, and I swear on everything. If my mother were here now, she would confirm every word. The story happened in 1975 in the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia, an old, cramped place full of Victorian houses that seemed to hide ghosts in the baseboards. My mother grew up there with 4 siblings. She was the middle child. Clara, I'll call her that. And like any teenager at the time, she became obsessed with the movie The Exorcist. After the movie came out, everyone wanted to play at being scared. And one of the biggest toys of that time was the so-called Ouija board. Yes, that board. Clara and her siblings, who I'll call Lizzie, Frank, Rachel, and Danny, pooled their allowances and bought the board at an old corner drugstore. They thought they were just going to laugh, pretend they were summoning spirits, that sort of thing bored teenagers do. But the thing worked. I mean, it didn't work with everyone. The board only seemed to really move with 2 of the siblings, Danny, the second oldest, and Rachel, the youngest. It was always with those 2, only with them, and when I say it moved, it's because it answered everything. They started with silly questions, of course. Who likes whom? If they were going to pass the test, what someone was going to get for their birthday. Kid stuff. But soon the game turned into an addiction, a dangerous addiction. They played every day. They came home from school, dropped their backpacks, and went straight to the basement, where they kept the board. Even when the house phone rang, they ran to ask the Ouija who it was before answering, and it was always right. It's Mrs. Tiller from Mum's work. It's Grandpa calling from the hospital. It was bizarre. One day, a friend of Frank's, let's call him Cal, came to visit. Cal didn't believe in any of that stuff. He thought it was acting, a trick by whoever pushed the planchette discreetly. So Cal made a challenge. He took off his shoe, put his hand in the inside pocket, and said, "If this game is real, tell me what's in here." The board was silent for a few seconds, and then began to move slowly. 3 coins, key, a paper, gum. Cal paled. He took everything out of his pocket. That's exactly what it was. He dropped the board, left the house without saying goodbye, and never came back. But Danny and Rachel just laughed. For them, that was already routine. Over time, other families in the neighborhood started buying boards too. It seemed like a fever, and with it came the reports. Objects disappearing, whispers at night, sensations of being watched. And always, the reports involved teenagers using the Ouija as if it were Uno. Now comes the part that gives me the most chills. The board hated my grandmother's presence. Every time she approached the basement, the planchette moved on its own, without anyone touching it, and wrote, "She is coming, hide." And soon after, everything stopped. The board froze, as if it had turned off. My grandmother began to suspect. She said there was something wrong in that house. One day, she went to pick up her youngest daughter in the basement, and found all the siblings around the board. She took them out of there, screaming, but the addiction was already too deep. On a Saturday night, while visiting some cousins in the Kensington neighborhood, Clara and Rachel took the board hidden to continue the game. They locked themselves in a room with two cousins and started the session. The older cousin asked, "Is there anyone here with us?" The planchette replied, "Yes." "Then give us a sign," said the other. The planchette moved again, letter by letter. "Look at the window." The four turned at the same time. And it was at that moment that the planchette flew alone from the board and hit the wall hard. They screamed. They ran downstairs, crying, saying that someone had pulled the object out of their hands. The adults didn't believe it, of course, but from that night on, things started to happen. Noises at the doors at night. Items disappearing and reappearing in impossible places. The radio turned on by itself, and a backpack of Danny's, which had disappeared for weeks, was found in the middle of the living room in the dark, with the zipper open and dirty with something black like soot. My grandmother swore she had hidden the backpack in the locked closet, but even so, it reappeared, always in the same place, on the floor of the living room. After that, with the backpack, my grandmother decided to put an end to the game. She tried to lock the board in the basement. Then she tried to hide it in the attic, behind the Christmas boxes. But somehow, it always came back. In the middle of the living room, in the dark, as if it were waiting. There was one night in particular that became famous in the family. Danny was looking for a record that had disappeared. A Motown LP that he swore he had left on the record player. He searched the whole house and nothing. Frustrated, he went to the board. Rachel placed her fingers along with him. "Where's Danny's record?" The planchette moved slowly. "Only You, Volume 1, they didn't understand. No one in the house had that album. They didn't even know if it existed." The next day, Danny went to a used record store in Old Richmond, and there, stacked between dozens of coverless vinyls, was that record. Only You, Volume 1. The name of the LP didn't make sense. It seemed like a generic compilation, but he took it home anyway. And that's when the shit really hit the fan. The first time they put the record on to play, the needle got stuck. The music played, but it was in a strange loop. The sound sounded wrong. The singer's voice seemed reversed. The beats jumped measures, and the planchette on the other side of the room began to move on its own. Rachel ran to place her fingers and asked, "Are you here?" The answer was quick. "Susie is." "Who is Susie?" "She will take your uncle." That was it. Cold, direct words. Everyone in the room looked at each other. That same night, the phone rang around 2 in the morning. Their uncle, my grandmother's oldest brother, who lived in Maryland, had suffered a heart attack and died in the ambulance. His wife's name, Susan, but everyone called her Susie. That was the last straw. The whole family panicked. My grandmother took her children to talk to a priest from the corner church. He didn't want to get involved. He said that the forces that are invoked must be closed by those who brought them. Then one of the Mexican neighbors, a lady named Senora Alvarez, who did blessings and prayers, gave them a parchment with an ancient prayer. She said that this would close the cycle if recited during the fire. That night, Clara, Danny, Rachel, and Lizzie went up to the roof of the building. They took the board, a gallon of gasoline, and the parchment from Alvarez. They tried to burn it, but the wood didn't catch fire. The gasoline ran down the sides. The flames danced around, but the board stayed there, intact, cold. It was only when they began to read the text aloud that the wood cracked. The flame turned blue, and then, yes, it began to burn. But what came next is what no one ever forgot. Rachel and Danny were on the parapet, looking at the street below while the board crackled. and on the other side of the sidewalk, between the dark buildings, a woman appeared, tall, thin, dressed in a black robe, long like a veil, her face covered, her feet didn't touch the ground. She walked slowly, dragging her shadow on the walls, and disappeared around the corner. It was at that exact moment that the last flame swallowed the board. Years later, my mother returned to the building with her sisters, just out of curiosity. She says that, upon leaving there, the three felt heavy, tired, as if something had remained stuck in that time, or worse, followed them to this day. And the strangest part, to this day, when the song Only You plays, that cursed vinyl that no one ever found again, Rachel says she feels the planchette moving in her memory, and she still swears, looking deep into the eye of whoever asks, that they never ever closed the last session. The board burned, but the spirit remained. So, if by chance anyone finds a record with the title Only You, Volume 1 in a used store, don't take it home, not even out of curiosity. My name is Elliot Graves. I'm 37 years old today, but what I'm about to tell happened in the autumn when I turned 25. And since then, my relationship with the silence of the forest has never been the same. At the time, I worked in IT at a startup in Charlotte, North Carolina. The routine was suffocating me. Burnout, anxiety, insomnia. My friends started to notice. It was one of them, Carter, who suggested, "You should spend some time alone, like ... disappear from the map. Go to my grandfather's cabin. It's in the middle of the red ash forest, near the border with Virginia. There's no signal, no neighbors for miles." It seemed perfect. The cabin was old, made of wood darkened by time, with a small porch and stone fireplace. A dirt road cut through the woods to get there. All around was just pine trees, dry leaves, and that autumn smell that sticks to your skin. I took only the basics: a thick blanket, canned food, a bottle of bourbon, and a reliable flashlight. Or at least I thought it was reliable. On the first night, everything went well. The temperature dropped, the wind whistled outside, and I stayed there, wrapped in front of the fireplace, listening to the crackle of the burning wood. The flickering light left shadows dancing on the walls. But around 3 a.m, I woke up, for no reason, without noise, but with a strange feeling, as if someone was watching me from some dark corner of the room. The fireplace had gone out. The only light came from the moon, filtered through the dirty windows. Everything seemed still. I got up slowly and grabbed the flashlight. As soon as I turned it on, it went out, as if the battery had been drained at once. I muttered a curse and stood there in total darkness. It was at that moment that I heard it. A whisper, low, slurred, in the room, but also inside my head. I thought it was the wind, but it was different. The sound seemed to repeat a word, but I didn't understand. My hairs stood on end. I took the candle I had left on the table, lit it with the lighter, and walked to the kitchen. Each step on the floor seemed to echo too loudly, as if the house were hollow. Out of the corner of my eye, I swear I saw something moving in the corner of the room. I turned quickly. Nothing. The candle flame trembled. My breathing became short. I went back to the mattress. I wrapped myself up like a child. I spoke aloud, just to myself. "You're alone here, Elliot. It's okay. It's just your imagination." But I couldn't sleep anymore. The next night, the tension worsened. The candle that I left lit next to the mattress, was extinguished. Not extinguished by a draft, blown out. It left a trail of dripped wax, as if an invisible hand had passed through it. I went to the front door. It was unlocked, and I was absolutely sure I had locked it before going to sleep. Outside, there were footprints, small, barefoot, but the ground was frozen. No animal would do that, and no normal human, much less. On the third night, things got out of control. I woke up to a dry crack coming from the basement. I didn't remember Carter mentioning a basement. I put on my jacket, grabbed the flashlight that, miraculously, started working again, and went down the creaking stairs of the room until I found a low, wooden door in the corner of the floor. I opened it slowly. A rotten smell escaped at once. I took the flashlight and went down the moldy steps of the basement. The light flickered, but remained, and then I saw. There, in the back, between old boxes and furniture covered by cloths, was a huge mirror. Old, rusty, iron frame, dirty glass, but still, it reflected. Only it wasn't my reflection that I saw. It was another me. Same clothes, same face. But the look, it was of pure terror. His mouth moved as if trying to warn me of something. "Get out," he seemed to say. "Get out now." Then he stretched out his arm from inside the mirror, and before I could run, an absurd cold crossed my chest, as if something had tried to pull my soul into the glass. I fell to the floor. The flashlight spun and went out, and in that total darkness, I heard laughter, childish, coming from all corners of the house. I ran like a condemned man. I went up the stairs, tripping. I slammed the front door, and I slept in the car. The next morning, I came back just to get my things, and since then, I've never set foot in that forest again. But sometimes, when I pass old mirrors in antique stores, I see that reflection, and he's still there, staring at me, with his mouth moving. And now, he no longer tries to warn me. He smiles. I went back to the city the same day. I didn't tell anyone anything, not even Carter. I just said that I had had an anxiety attack and needed to leave earlier than expected. A lie. I left because I knew that thing still saw me. The following weeks were full of nightmares, always with the same sequence. The cabin, the mirror, the other me, and the children's laughter. I started avoiding mirrors. I covered all the mirrors in the house with dark sheets. I avoided elevators with mirrors, shop windows, even cell phone screens reflecting in the dark. But that didn't help. The apparitions began to leave the mirror. One night, I was taking a shower. The bathroom mirror was covered, but the glass of the shower still reflected slightly. And I swear on everything, I saw my reflection smile. Before I smiled, it was as if he had moved forward, as if it wasn't me. From then on, I started losing time. Hours disappeared. I woke up with the TV on channels I never watched. Once, I went to the market, and when I realized, I was in the parking lot of a motel 12 kilometers from my house, with sweaty clothes, red eyes, and the trunk open, without remembering how I got there. I went to the psychiatrist. He talked about dissociation, stress, burnout. He prescribed tranquilizers. But the problem wasn't internal. It was external. On the third night of medication, I had the worst dream of all. I woke up in the dream, in the cabin, but it was all destroyed. The windows were shattered, the fireplace was out, and the floor covered in handprints. Small marks, as if children had crawled around there for days. I went to the basement. The mirror was still there. But now there was something behind it. A crowd, children, all with black, unblinking eyes, pale skin, some without a face, others identical to me, but in different versions. One of them seemed to be about 7 years old, with the same features that I see in my old photos. The crowd moved away, making space, and there he was, the other me. He came out of the mirror, and he spoke to me. You crossed, even without wanting to. Crossed what? The veil, the door, the layer between what you think is real and what really observes you. I tried to run, but the childish hands grabbed me by the legs. You drew attention when you saw the reflection, when you let yourself be pulled. But I didn't do anything. I just went to spend a weekend and found a house that was never abandoned. How so? He smiled. You thought the mirror reflected you, but what if it was a window? I woke up screaming, covered in sweat, with small handprints on my arms, like scratches. My nails were clean, but there was dirt under them, as if I had dug something. That morning, I finally confronted Carter. I asked about his grandfather, about the cabin, about the mirror. He looked at me, strangely. Dude, my family never had a cabin in Red Ash. What do you mean? You gave me the address. No, I told you about a campsite on the edge of the lake. It wasn't even close to Red Ash. I was silent. I took the paper where I had written down the address. It was no longer in my backpack. There was only a small mirror with a rusty frame inside it. A shadow staring at me. From that day on, I stopped sleeping. I keep myself awake with coffee and bright lights, because I know that if I go out again, he finishes coming out and switches places with M. My name is Claire. I'm 36 years old today, but what I'm about to tell happened when I was only 12, and since then, I've never been the same. First of all, let me explain. My mother always had something. She said she dreamed of things before they happened. Premonitions, intuitions, country woman stuff, you know. We lived on an old ranch on the outskirts of Crestwood, a rural town in Indiana, where there are still more scarecrows than traffic lights. My parents were farmers. My 3 brothers and I shared the same room with 2 bunk beds. We grew up on cornbread, prayer, and a lot of fear of the dark. Except that, in that house, the dark seemed darker than normal. The first strange thing I remember happened on a cold autumn morning. I woke up freezing, with the blanket pushed off the bed. I went to pull it back and realized that my brothers were huddled in a corner of the room, all awake, all looking in the same direction, the hallway door. I asked what's wrong, and my youngest brother just said, "The red dog is back." We didn't have a dog, never had, but since that week, they said they saw a red dog inside the house, with big, luminous eyes. The first time, I thought it was imagination. The third time, I started to hear the growl. My mother said it was just the cold messing with your nerves, but even she started to get different. She woke up in the middle of the night talking to herself. She had deep, dark circles under her eyes. She stopped going to church. She started lighting candles around the house. She put salt in the windows, and every night before going to sleep, she said the same phrase: "If he comes with hooves, don't look. If he floats, pray. But if he screams, cover your ears and run." I didn't understand. I thought my mother was losing her mind, until that night, the night that everything screamed. It was a Tuesday. We were already asleep. The whole house was silent, except for the rustling of the leaves of the cornfield hitting the windows. And suddenly, we heard footsteps. But they weren't ordinary footsteps. They were hooves beating on the wooden floor of the hallway. Slow, heavy, as if something ... expected to be heard. My father got out of bed with a rifle. He went to check, and I, for some reason, decided to peek through a crack in the door. That's when I saw a huge, hunched shadow standing at the end of the hall, and it was floating. The feet or hooves didn't touch the ground, it just hovered there. But the worst wasn't that. It was what came next. The creature, whatever it was, opened its mouth and let out a scream, a sound that wasn't human nor animal. It was like a million voices yelling at the same time in different directions. The sound went through the walls, the window glass broke, and my father fell to his knees. My brothers fainted, and I, for the first time, felt my heart stop. My mother came running, holding a crucifix, shouting, "Don't listen, cover your ears." I obeyed, and I swear to God, the sound disappeared. But when I took my hands off, the house was too quiet. My father was still on his knees, with his gaze extinguished. He was alive, but he never spoke after that day, and my mother only said one thing: "Now he knows where we live." After that night, nothing was the same. My father, or what was left of him, began to live in a state that doctors called functional catatonia. He walked, ate, blinked, but didn't speak, didn't react, didn't seem to be there anymore. It was as if the scream had emptied him from the inside. My mother began to say prayers out loud. She spread crucifixes all over the house. She told us to stop going to school for a while, and didn't explain the reason to anyone in town. Everything turned to silence and salt in the windows. But one thing haunts me to this day. The morning after the scream, there were hoof marks around the house, and they weren't normal. They looked burned into the earth, shaped like paws that didn't belong to any animal I know, and they had 3 fingers, 3 long fingers, as if they were paws of a creature that never existed in this world. On the second night, my mother made us all sleep in the same room, candles lit, Bible open to Psalm 91, and again, the sound of hooves. This time, it didn't just stay outside. Something came in. The candles began to tremble. The crucifix fell from the wall. And in the dark, between the flashes of wind hitting the window, someone whispered my name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was soft, slurred, and impossible to imitate. Claire. I trembled all over. My mother got up and began to pray aloud, as if she were fighting with the air. And then, the scream came back. But now, it came from inside the house. It sounded as if it exploded from the basement. The windows cracked. The wood of the floor bent. The candle went out on its own. And for a second, just a second, I saw something go up the stairs. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was just a silhouette, shapeless, trembling as if it were made of liquid smoke. But in place of the head, there was a hole, like an open mouth. When the creature reached the last step, everything stopped. The wind ceased. The house went silent. And then it disappeared. The next morning, my mother sent us straight to my aunt's house in Illinois. She said she needed to solve this before he came for good. She stayed alone. 2 nights later, we received a phone call. The house had caught fire. Police said the fire was caused by a short circuit in the basement. But the strange part, the basement was all sealed with wood and had no electricity at all. In the official report, they didn't find my mother's body. Only remains of what appeared to be melted candles, a broken rosary, and a word written with charcoal on the brick wall, closed. Nowadays, I don't go back to Indiana anymore. I don't go near Crestwood. I don't even get close to cornfields, because I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And sometimes, when the wind blows from the wrong side, I still hear that sound, that scream, coming from nowhere. He's still out there, looking for an open door. So if one day you hear hooves at night, if a shadow whispers your name, cover your ears and run before he screams a guy.